The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Tudors Dynasty Podcast. I am your host, Rebecca Larson, and today I have a co-host again, our dear friend, Dr. Emma. Emma, welcome back.
Hi, everyone. How you guys?
Oh, we're so
Happy
excited.
New Year, right?
Yes. Happy New Year. And we're welcoming to the show today as our guest, once again, Sylvia Barbara Soberton. Sylvia, welcome back.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me again.
Well, thanks for being brave enough to come on with Emma and I, because we're crazy.
Oh,
Wow.
I'm so honored and privileged to be here talking to you guys about one of my favorite subjects. So,
Oh, me too. I'm so excited about this episode. I can't hide it. I'm just like, yay! This morning I was getting ready. I was thinking, yes, I love it.
Well, I'm excited to talk about this one too. I don't think I've done an episode like this at all recently. And I think, Emma, why don't you just start off? This is kind of your wheelhouse, what we're talking about today.
Right.
With
Exactly.
Sylvia. And that's the reason why I wanted you on this episode, because I thought, well, we're talking about identifications in art, and who better than an art historian to be on to help discuss this topic. So, Emma, I'm going to turn it over to you for now.
Yeah, an art historian obsessed with the Tudors and their portraits and the identification of portraits in the Tudor era. So, yes. And that's why I was so happy when that paper that Sylvia just published came out in the Royal Studies Journal in the 10th year anniversary edition, I believe.
yes.
So it's a big issue. It's a great celebration of a very, very good journal that has now a long trajectory. The University of Winchester, I believe, Dr. Ellie Woodacre started this whole, it's a whole project thing. It's huge. And she's amazing. So I published something last year too, so that's how I know them too. And this year, when I saw this paper, I was like, Holbein and Susannah Horenbout. Okay, you got my attention.
Yeah,
So,
I'm in, right?
Yes, I did. You certainly did. So, and then I read it. Amazing paper. To me, I'm convinced. And I don't want to give away because it's Sylvia's discovery. I want her to talk about it, but
Thank you so much.
I did give away a little bit, Susannah Horenbout and Holbein, but I'm not going to say anything else. Sylvia can present it, but I was really impressed. So congratulations on that, and yeah, let us know because it's so exciting.
Well, thank you so much for your very nice words. I'm so humbled.
So, why don't we start off, Sylvia, by, from the beginning, right? This is how it's always the easiest thing to do is to go back to the beginning and say, when was that moment where you decided that this was the path that you wanted to forge?
So the title of the paper is Susannah Horenbout at the Tudor Court, Hans Holbein's Forgotten Sitter. And there's a question mark in the end. So my first interest in this drawing, because it's a drawing inscribed on the left corner as Lady Parker, and we basically don't know anything more about it. It's just the Lady Parker by Hans Holbein. And this drawing has a long history of being associated with Lady Jane Boleyn, Viscountess Rochford. And this is really how I became interested in this drawing in the first place. Because I was researching Jane Boleyn and her life and afterlife. And because this drawing is so attached to her name, I just wanted to see if there's any link of this drawing to her. And when I started researching, I learned from Julia Fox's book that no, this has really nothing to do with Jane Boleyn, but because her maiden name was Parker, she was Jane Parker originally, then some historians in the past tended to ascribe this particular drawing to Jane, to identify it as Jane. And sometimes, or not sometimes, very often, still in online articles, for example, or on posts on social media, this is still the drawing that is attached to Jane Boleyn and said to be of Jane Boleyn. And I just wanted to put this kind of like debunk this myth. It's not Jane Boleyn. It never had any real links with her. But it's still linked with her for some reason. I think because this is a very pretty lady, on the sketch, and people, I guess, want to see what Jane Boleyn really looked like. So that's why it's so popular, I think. Then from that, establishing that it's not Jane Boleyn, I went further. So the Royal Collection currently has this sitter identified as Grace Parker. Now, her maiden name was Grace Newport. And my goal, I guess, was to research this lady to see if she was at court, if she was a prominent person at court, if she served in the households of Henry VIII's queens, and so on. And so I was able to establish some new facts of Grace's life, because so far she's been not a lot of things are known about her. We know who was she married to. She was married to Henry Parker, who was, by the way, Jane Boleyn's brother. So another link to Jane. And Henry Parker was the son and heir of Henry Parker, the 10th Baron Morley. So she was kind of an important lady, but she was not recorded in the households of Henry VIII's queens. And we know that she married when she was 8. She married in 1523, but she started having children 10 years later, in 1533, when she was around 18 years old. And by a miraculous stroke of luck, I guess, we have a record of every child born to Grace and to Henry Parker. And we have their birth dates, their names, and their godparents' names. So that's a huge thing. And we know from this record that Grace had a child every year from 1533 to 1538, and that she died in 1538 after having her last baby. And because she was so young, she was about 24 years old, I think it's reasonable to speculate that she perhaps died as a result of childbirth complications. So she disappears from the record as quickly and as abruptly as she appeared in it. And I haven't seen her in the households of Henry's queens, although the description of the sketch on the Royal Collection website says that she was present in Jane Seymour's household, that she was that took part in a baptism of Prince Edward, and that she was also part of Jane Seymour's funeral cortege that she rode in one of the chariots after Queen Jane's hers. But I found no evidence of this, and those events are very well documented. We know who took part in those events, and Grace's name is not there. So that's another myth that I've been able to debunk. So saying this, I've established that Grace wasn't really that prominent in court circles. So I was wondering, like, how is it possible that Holbein would have painted or sketched her if she wasn't even at court at the time when he was active? Mm-hmm. That brought me to another person, which is the second wife of Henry Parker, Elizabeth Calthorpe. She's another possible candidate. She was suggested in the 19th century. But again, she doesn't appear in the court records of this period. She's kind of a shadowy figure as well. So this really kind of brings me to the last candidate, whom I've seen several times during my research. She's Susannah Parker. She's called Susannah Parker in the records. And she was, of course, the Susannah Horenbout. And why is it important to establish that she was Susannah Parker? Because she was married to Sir John Parker, who was a yeoman of the King's Wardrobe of Robes and keeper of the Palace of Westminster. Mm-hmm. He was quite a prominent court official. And because he was so prominent and associated with the King's Wardrobe, he appears, and he and Susannah appear on the New Year's gift lists, those that we have. So, for example, if in 1533, Susannah and John appear on the New Year's gift list, and her name is interestingly recorded after the names of Anne Boleyn's 5 serving women, which allows me to believe that she is perhaps somehow associated with the household, with the newly forming household of Anne Boleyn at this period. We know that she was very prominent in court circles because of her husband, but also because she was a painter. Now, we don't really have a lot of records of her as a paintress. For example, we know that she was a member of the Horenbout family. So her father was Gerard Horenbout, her brother was Lucas Horenbout, and they were very prominent painters at Henry VIII's court. Now, the Horenbouts came to England in the 1520s. We don't have the exact date when they came, but in the 1520s, miniatures start to appear at Henry VIII's court. And the Horenbouts were the famous miniaturists, painters, and manuscript illuminators. We don't also have the exact record or exact account of how they came to England, who invited them. Later in later years, we have this record of Vasari saying that Susannah was invited by Henry VIII. But I think it's more likely that she came as the daughter of Gerard because she was so young. At the time, she was her father's apprentice. And it was Gerard and Lucas who were invited to Henry VIII's court, possibly because they were linked with Margaret of Austria. Gerard was a painter at the court of Margaret of Austria. And Margaret of Austria, again, she had very tight links with Catherine of Aragon. She was her former sister-in-law. And she had also links with Henry VIII by extension. So I think that Margaret of Austria may have recommended Gerard to the Tudors, and that's how they came to England. And so it's really interesting to think about Susannah as a miniaturist. She was praised by Albrecht Dürer, by the very famous German painter of the time, and he met her when she was about 18 years old. And he said that she painted this little picture of a savior, and he bought it from her for the same price as he would have paid to a man. So he recognized her talent in that respect. Now, until very recently, we didn't know if there are any works that can be firmly ascribed to Susannah, but it was recently published, it was in the news, that a team of researchers led by Dr. Emma Rutherford discovered a miniature of Lady Mary, Princess Mary, Lady Mary Tudor, that can be firmly ascribed to Susannah's hand. So that's very exciting that we not only have Susannah's face, but we also have an example of Susannah's work. So that's very, very interesting. And when it comes to this drawing by Hans Holbein, it is inscribed in the left corner as Lady Parker. So as we know, we've already established, she was married to Sir John Parker, so she was referred to as Lady Parker in the documents. We have that documented. And the inscriptions are not contemporary. They are in 18th century's hand, but they are based on the identifications of Sir John Cheek, who was a tutor to Edward VI, Henry VIII's son and heir. Now, sometimes Sir John Cheek's identifications are called into question because he was wrong on 2 occasions. And we know that he was wrong on those 2 occasions because the drawings that he identified were of women who appear in Sir Thomas More's family portrait. And we know that what those women's names were, and they were not those names which John Cheek identified. But those are only 2 examples of John Cheek being wrong. And mostly he knew the people that he was identifying. He knew them from sight, he knew them from court. So it seems to me that he knew also Susannah as Lady Parker, and he identified her as such, although in October of 1537, Susannah became a widow. And she remarried later to John Gilman in September of 1539. And from that point on, she is referred to in documents as Mistress Gilman. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's in a short story, long story short, it's how I came to identify this drawing as Susannah Horenbout.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because, like you said at the beginning, it's for so long this sketch has been attributed to Jane Boleyn. And I'm pretty sure on my website, you're still going to find images of her as, feature images for articles. I think because we were all so desperate for some
Exactly,
visual.
Yes. Yes,
And then
exactly.
after
I agree.
it feels a bit weird to take off a picture of someone when people, but that's the way it should work. I mean, for a long time, it still happens with Catherine of Aragon, who is the queen. It still happens with Anne Boleyn, who is the two most famous women in the Tudor court that really their faces are only known to us recently. More in the case of Catherine of Aragon than Anne Boleyn, because Anne Boleyn we haven't settled yet. Which portraits are her or not, maybe soon. More to come this year on that. But in the case of Catherine of Aragon, until we've looked at them, this is why Sylvia's discovery is so important, because the Horenbouts are the first ones to really put a face to Catherine of Aragon, to Henry VIII in a way that we can recognize them. So what we were talking about when we were talking about the not only the idealism, but in this case more the verisimilitude. So we have, in the case of Catherine of Aragon, a small miniature painted by one of the Horenbouts because of that style. We know they introduced a certain style, and we've talked in other cases, right? So in that case, it has an inscription, and it says Queen Catherine, his wife. I mean, they couldn't be more clear about the message here. That miniature, as Sylvia knows, pairs with another one of Henry, where they say it's in his 35th year of life, right? Exactly. So, I mean, that is right at the time that the whole thing is going down, the whole marriage affair, the whole affair with Anne Boleyn. So it's very interesting that what Sylvia brought up about 1533 and Susannah all of a sudden appearing in the new household of Anne Boleyn. Not only Susannah, but then Lucas is made an English subject, and there's a series of things that happen that you're like, well, if they came in the 1520s, why wait until
Aragon?
Right?
Yes.
So in that sense, and I don't want to touch a lot about this because it is an article that it's coming out, but it hasn't seen the light. And I would like to vindicate in this case that it's very important for these kind of things to be talked about in full, or to be announced in full when they're published.
Yes.
In a peer review process. Otherwise, it's very unfair on the people who are doing the research. So these announcements sometimes are not the way things should work in the academic world or in the publishing world. We should honor discoveries like this. So talking about that, I do this chapter that I have in a book is coming out this year. And it's about the recruitment of Susannah Horenbout and about the recruitment of Livina Turnlich. In the case of Susannah, it's very obvious. It was through Catherine of Aragon. The 1522, the treaty that was the marriage treaty or the alliance treaty between Henry VIII and Charles V, that is in Simancas, in Valladolid, has a miniature of Henry VIII by the Horenbouts. 1522. Right? So it has to be a Horenbout because of the style, because of all those things. 1520, we have a woman in Calais giving the emperor a chain for a portrait of himself. Well, this is just months before Jura buys that little saber, because she was famous.
I mentioned that in the paper as well, that you think that this woman who gave Charles, the Emperor Charles, a portrait and who was rewarded. That
and this wasn't this was a fact that was not known. It was included in my dissertation.
That's why I linked it to your dissertation.
Oh, thank you so much, Sylvia. That was very nice, because it's important to cite dissertations, even though they're not published work. They are academic works.
Yeah, very important, of course. Too bad that it's in Spanish. I mean, I understand Spanish when I see it. I don't speak Spanish, but I understand Spanish when I see it. So I was, looking at that, and I was like, that's a very plausible theory.
Right. Thank you. So I'll say the same with Italian. So, because Italian is, Spanish is my first language. Italian, I can sort of, so when I went through the Venetian ambassador's report where he mentions this, and this is why it wasn't a known fact, because it's just hidden away in some report in the Venetians, I didn't understand everything right away. I had to go into Google Translate and get those phrases out and see if I could understand. And finally, I had to consult with someone that knew Italian, so I didn't get everything the wrong way. So it's difficult, I know, but it's very necessary. So so what I'm saying is that it's incredible that we can find with these, because it's so difficult to research women artists, these things, and how you've been able to say, well, it's not this one, it's not the other one, and it comes down to it has to be Susannah. And to me, I mean, I'm totally convinced it's her.
Thank you.
It's so nice to see her in my brain finally. So thank you for that. That's huge for me.
Mental image. Now you have a mental image.
I do. It's here. I believe. Yeah. And I'm researching some of the Holbein sketches too. I will be. I have an exhibition coming up in the British Museum this year, and one of the Holbein sketches, a very famous one, linked to the Portrait Medal of Anne Boleyn, will be featured there. So this is not just important because these Holbein sketches are key. And this book that you're talking about, I'm researching where it came from, because it was supposed to be in the collection of Henry VIII, right? And Edward VI. But really are the women who are exchanging the portraits all the time. So in my opinion, this was Lady Mary Tudor's sketchbook, because there's another sketchbook with jewels, right, in the British Museum. Yes. And there's one that says My Lady Princess, and there's one that says Mary, and there's one that says Catherine and Henry. So, I mean, Sylvia, we're right there. We're going to make so many discoveries coming up.
Well, that's how it works, right? Because somebody discovers something, and then another person builds upon that, upon that knowledge already. So that's very exciting that Susannah has her moment of glory finally, because when I was researching the paper, there was just really one source of information about Susannah, and it was a paper by Susan Foister and Lauren Campbell. So that's the most important paper so far, and that has a lot of information, like biographical information about her and so on. And now it seems like it's 2025 is going to be Susannah's year, because she finally has a face. She finally has another researcher, who is researching her so diligently. So it's great that we have so much information coming about Susannah. I just wanted to add something about the households of the queens of Henry VIII that she served in. You are right that she was that she served probably in the household of Catherine of Aragon, although I haven't seen exactly some chamber accounts are missing, but it's very logical to.
Oh, I wonder why.
Exactly. And then Anne Boleyn, we know that she served Anne Boleyn probably, but with Anne of Cleves, we are on a more firmer ground, because we know that Henry VIII sent Susannah, who was then Mistress Gilman because she remarried.
She was also a diplomat.
Exactly, and he sent her to Germany to fetch Anne of Cleves, to join her household there. Yes, and historians wonder why this was, because maybe Henry wanted a painting of Anne, maybe perhaps, but he already had a painting by Holbein. So perhaps a miniature that is in the British Museum. There's this miniature of Anne of Cleves, and it's ascribed to Holbein's hand. Although, if you look at them close side by side, you will see that the face is a little bit different than in Holbein.
I think it's the Victoria and Albert Museum.
Oh yeah, exactly, in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Yeah, thank you. And if you compare them, you will see that the faces are a little bit different. And I wonder out loud.
The tenderness in the miniature,
exactly.
Right?
If that miniature is perhaps by Susannah,
I agree with you. It could be
Germany.
Makes a lot of sense. And the theory, and this was
another theory that I have. Yeah.
Well, in this theory, because we are told that the Holbein learned how to do court portraiture and limning from the Horenbouts. Well, from which one? Right? If both Holbein and Susannah are involved with Anne of Cleves and coming and going, I can't believe that they're not involved in painting her together. Yes. There's a lot of work being done now in workshops And Holbein probably joined the workshop that the Horenbouts already had going on, that Catherine of Aragon has started in the area of Blackfriars and Baynard's Castle. That proposed that in my dissertation. It's difficult, as you said, because it's in Spanish and people are not picking it up. But I thought that was groundbreaking, to be honest with you. In the case of Holbein, also, it's very important to know that how he arrives to England too, because he arrives in 1526. Interesting year in the Tudor court, right? The same year that Erasmus of Rotterdam writes a book for Catherine of Aragon on marriage, and Holbein arrives to England with letters of recommendation from Erasmus of Rotterdam.
Yes.
And the book that he writes on matrimony is dedicated to Catherine and mentions in the dedication a painter's work, and has, a frontispiece by Holbein. So I don't know how many more leads people need to think and know that Holbein arrives because of Catherine of Aragon. So this link is not just Holbein is the Horenbouts. It's really artistic innovation to the service of dynastic purposes, with Margaret of Austria first, and then, very interestingly, after Margaret of Austria dies, with Mary of Hungary and Mary Tudor. And that goes on until she marries Philip of Spain and Antonismo arrives. It's all part of the same idea that the artists that are working in the Spanish monarchy are so good. They're not Spanish. They're from Flanders, from Italy, are coming to England when the relations between the Tudors and the Trastámaras, or the Tudors and the Habsburgs, are working, right? When there's those marriage alliances and those things. So this is he was from Habsburg. He was from the Augsburg. He was from the Empire. Holbein was from the Empire, right? For example, Lucas Horenbout's wife was the daughter of a German goldsmith. German, right? This is what I'm talking about when you see it from this perspective. There's going to be a boom in that so this is part of that. Does it take away from Henry VIII? No, he was smart to bring these people and to use his wife's contacts to do this. But we have to give credit where credit is due, especially if you have the most famous woman, Susannah Horenbout, coming to work with you. But Jura flipping out on her work and other people later on. And we're rescuing her from nobody knew about her 5 years ago, to be honest with you. So, people knew about her. There was work done in the 80s.
Yeah, in academic circles for sure, but in more popular books, then she's just appearing very quickly and disappears. And even in those books, she's not very often even said to have existed. So you're very right that we are saving her from oblivion, so to speak.
Yes.
So that she doesn't disappear. I guess that one of the reasons why she's not well known to the wider public is because we don't really have a black and white, record that she was a painter at Henry D. Scott. We have that from later sources and from, of course, from assumptions. But with Lavinia Terling, for example, we have this record of her, small print in a manuscript, that she was a paintrix, so a paintress. And that's why she has the status of being like a female painter at the Tudor court. With Susannah, we don't have that. Perhaps we don't have that yet. I'm sure it exists somewhere, a record of her as a paintress at Henry VIII's court. We just have to find it. But from other sources, we do know that she painted, that she was very skilled at what she was doing. So I guess that we don't have that one record that would name her as the painter, as the female painter. Because, for example, her brother, we know that Lucas Horenbout was the king's painter. He died in 1544. And interesting things were happening after that, because we know that, for example, Catherine Parr, who became Henry VIII's wife as his last wife, his sixth wife, she was very interested in artistic patronage, and she employed the female painters as well. So Susannah Horenbout, Lavinia Terling, and also Susannah Horenbout's sister-in-law, Margaret Holswither. I think her last name is pronounced Holswither. If not, I'm sorry.
I don't even, you know me, I say however it comes out.
As long as you're confident when you say it, that's all that matters.
Well, and then if somebody corrects me because they know better, I can change it. It's not a problem.
But you know who I'm talking about. So
Yes, exactly. I know exactly who you're talking about. She was the one who was the daughter of the German goldsmith.
yes.
But this, when you see it from an art historian perspective, this was something very common. And Flanders and England are very close by. So they're finding people that are in the same trades to build bigger relationships between Flanders and Susannah was from Ghent. The Levina was from Bruges. They're from the Flanders. They're not from the Dutch area. They're from the would remain Catholic. But then, for example, when I'm studying now into the 17th century in the Stuart period, this gets reactivated, and other Flemish artists marry English people that descend from these people that are in England, but are really Flemish origin because they're in the same trades, because they're craftsmen, either goldsmiths, which is very important in this period, and the Horenbouts, we have to think they're painting miniatures. So it's very similar techniques to manuscripts too. So there's a lot of, this is because the Renaissance is bursting. So they're not just, in my dissertation, I had a very nice title in Spanish called that Susannah jumped from the parchment to the canvas. Because
very evocative.
So what I said and what my chapter proposes to is that she could have been the person collaborated to paint the portrait of Mary Tudor that she paid for in 1544. Why is this payment and this commission of a portrait of Mary Tudor not in the forefront of every Tudor book, when it's about art history? It's because Mary has been just set aside,
marginalized. Yes,
she never did anything. She's always a religious fanatic. She's awful. She burned people. Bloody Mary. Well, she's the first royal woman to commission and pay for a portrait of herself. The same year that Susannah Horenbout is mentioned in her privy purse accounts, receiving material. That means, what I argue is that means that she was re-entering her service in 1544, and she was most probably involved in this. Mary pays in that 1544. She pays for a certain John who drew her face. We have sketches. So somebody could have drawn Mary and another person could have, I think this is a collaborative work. Both of Susannah's husbands are John.
Yes.
And in John Parker's will, there are art stuff. There's art stuff mentioned, and he leaves gold to his sister-in-law. He leaves gold to her, and so he was he was involved in the arts too. Was he an outstanding painter like Susannah? No, but he was probably a fairly good painter. Was he the one to receive payment for what Susannah had done? Maybe. Or by this time he was her other husband was also John.
But also John.
Yes. So we have to think in these terms, Susannah. And I think that tenderness that we talked about in the miniature of Anne of Cleves in the Victoria Albert Museum, I see that same tenderness in the National Portrait Gallery in the portrait of Mary Tudor.
Yes.
And the technique is very similar. It's a blue asterite. There's an inscription like the Horenbout miniatures, the same model as the Catherine of Aragon miniature. It's just taking this little thing into a bigger format, really.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that Susannah's works are hiding in plain sight in front of our eyes, and we don't know that we are looking at.
Well, in my chapter, I will propose that painting. I will propose she collaborated, probably. I think we have to stop thinking that one person just goes and chops the wood and gets the canvas ready. You know what I mean? It's a collaborative process, and by this time they're using sketches already. They're using sketches because there's a sketch by Holbein of Mary Tudor in the same collection that you found, the sketch of Susannah Horenbout. She's wearing the same jewel as in the National Portrait Gallery. So, and Susannah knew Mary very well.
Of course, yeah.
You know why? Because she is mentioned in Mary Tudor's household in 1525.
Yes.
She goes to Ludlow with her, and her dad and her brother. So, I mean, this is amazing. This is opening a new door, especially for so this year is the year of Susannah Horenbout and Mary Tudor.
And Mary
Tudor. Together. And it's all thanks to, who? Team Catherine of Aragon.
It's all started with Catherine of Aragon,
This
right?
is my favorite gift, Christmas gift
Team
for anyone
Catherine
who's
of
not,
Aragon. Oh my goodness.
whoever can't see it. Santa brought me the most amazing gift, which is a mug that says Team Catherine of Aragon.
Your redheaded
amazing.
Santa
Santa.
called Rebecca. Am I right?
I love it.
I need to make one for myself that says Team
And then
Thomas
Sylvia
Seymour.
needs one that says Team Susannah Horenbout.
Yeah.
I definitely need one. I
Yeah.
will have one. I promise you. I
Yes,
will.
and you can put a picture on it too.
I
There
will.
you go.
That's right.
I will.
Yes. Well, I want one too. So whenever you have the link to buy them, I'll
Okay, I
send it
will. I
to
will
me.
link when I will have it. I will link.
Yes, yes.
It's a
It's
great
your
idea.
discovery. You claim it, girl, because it's amazing to just see her face. She did, and I said this before off camera. I'm just going to say it. She looks a little bit like Catherine of Aragon. I mean,
You already
Catherine-
said that before.
yeah, Catherine of Aragon. No, they have, but just to describe the picture, really, she's wearing this very fashionable French hood that we all talk about, Dutch hood, Flemish hood. Okay, the hood that we all like, the modern one, not the English gable hood. She's got, you know, strawberry blonde hair, blue eyes. She looks younger than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And
I saw
tinier than I
people
thought.
online posting under this when I posted links and pictures of this drawing. I saw people saying that Susannah looks like either Scarlett Johansson or Dakota Fanning, the actress Dakota Fanning.
Okay, Netflix, please. We have something here.
So,
I love Scarlett
for sure, she's
Johansson.
very beautiful. You know,
Yes.
the Susannah from the sketch is for sure very beautiful,
Yes.
very delicate, very fragile.
Yes, yes. Well, she was a
so I would
miniaturist.
love-
So
I would
imagine her
absolutely-
hands.
Yeah,
Her hands
I would
must have been
absolutely.
tiny.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to see a portrait by Holbein based on this drawing, but unfortunately, we don't have the corresponding portrait
Yes.
now, or maybe it's hiding somewhere in a private collection. We don't know.
Yes. Yeah.
But I also wanted to say that when I started researching that, I had this mental picture of Susannah. There is a miniature in Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna that was for a very long time a mental picture that I had of Susannah.
Yeah.
And then I started researching this one, and I learned that it's not Susannah. Well, newsflash, it's not Susannah. But it was identified as her by Arthur Chamberlain in the early 20th century. Chamberlain was very popular as a biographer of Hans Holbein.
Yeah.
He published Holbein's biography in 2 volumes, so that's quite a thing to achieve. But his identification of that miniature as Susannah doesn't stand really to scrutiny, because
Right.
there is no inscription, no coat of arms, no nothing basically. And I don't know why is it. I guess people were just hungry and desperate for a picture of Susannah.
Yeah.
That's why it functions sometimes as her, but it's not her. So I just
Well, and then when I always thought she's not going to be far from this, right? Because that is a Dutch woman or a Flemish woman too.
Yeah.
So obviously, someone who probably knew Susannah because she's important, because she's in the court of Henry VIII. Because it's a matching. They're two, right? They're paired
with a servant, yes.
with a servant that says H8. So Henry VIII. I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's
Henry
someone.
VIII's liver, yes, and that's why I think it was identified as Susannah and her husband John Parker. But we don't really have any firm identification to base this upon. There's no inscription, no coats of arms, and so
And then very interesting to think about Parker, John Parker, being in charge of the wardrobe, because if you think about it, the paintrix and the guy in charge of the wardrobe, perfect combination, really. If you think about it, that's why she's so delicate and fashionable. First of all, Jura said it is amazing that a woman can do this. But I think Sylvia brought up a very interesting point. She looks tiny in this. She looks very small. So it's probably she had very, very tiny hands too, right? And that's why it probably would give her an advantage to men or other women that she had tiny hands. Sometimes you see these manuscripts, especially that have been attributed to the Horenbouts and how they introduce the Renaissance style. There's a lot of work published on that. For example, Kren and the Getty, they published a very big catalog on illuminated manuscripts, and they did some attempt to identify some of the different characteristics in Gerard, Lucas, and Susannah. But I think if we could establish that, and I think it's pretty obvious that if she is the woman that Charles rewarded in 1520 with a chain, a gold chain, for a picture that she gave him, of Charles. This is all linked to the marriage proposal with Mary Tudor. We would have to think that probably was Susannah the one in charge of most of the portraits, right? Most of the portraits, because a gold chain is a very specific type of gift for a painter. 13 years later, the same monarch, Charles V, would bestow the same chain on Titian. Mm-hmm. But this is 13 years later, and then Titian receives it. Later on, Rubens, Van Dyck, Velázquez, all these guys. Susannah, as far as I know, would be the first one.
Mm-hmm.
So I got nothing.
Yeah. Well, you know who else receives it? And I think this is trying to emulate Susannah and Catherine's relationship. Artemisia Gentileschi, very famous Italian Baroque painter, whose father was Orazio Gentileschi, who was brought to England by Charles I and Henrietta Maria. She's one of the most famous women artists of all time. She traveled to England to help her father, right? She also receives a chain because of her work for the Queen of England, and she paints herself receiving this chain as the allegory of painting. And this is a painting that is still in the Royal Collection in England. I'm sure that Artemisia Gentileschi could have seen the miniatures, and she would have known, oh, these are the ones that woman artist called Susannah the Dura. This was known at the time. This is what I'm saying. This is just not known to us because but I think at the time, because Artemisia Gentileschi would have read Vasari and other artists that talked about Susannah and the wonderful. And I think when Vasari says Henry VIII, it's because it's Henry VIII's court, but it's Henry VIII's court and Catherine of Aragon's. It's just a way men talk about, It wouldn't be the first time a guy doesn't mention the most important part. Right?
Yeah, exactly, yes. Yeah, so, I agree, yeah.
And it was Henry who invited, because the invitation had to come from the king, finally, to be, but it was Catherine like that one. And Henry went, oh, hi, do you want to come here? And that's the way it worked. And they were very successful. They brought Torrigiano, they brought the Horenbout. Think about the artists that Catherine of Aragon brought, and think about the artists after her downfall. They're not as good, I'm sorry to say.
Imagine this group of artists, let's say it's before Holbein dies in 1543, and you have this group of amazing artists at Tudor court. Can you imagine them hanging out, talking about?
Let's write a letter to, I don't know, who at the time they could have written a letter, to the Pope. No, but for example, this is why it's so difficult to be studying women artists and women in general, and that's why Sylvia's work is so important. It's very difficult, but then you find a little snippet that gives you it opens a door, right? I read recently that Erasmus of Rotterdam criticized Holbein for changing alliances. Mm-hmm. And there's some work being done on how Holbein changes his art to favor the Protestant faith in England in the reign of Henry VIII. But in 1527, who was he working for? Fun guy, Sir Henry Guilford. Yes, he was painting a picture of Terouanne to show to the French ambassadors that Holbein would paint later. I'm just saying. This is all connected. This is just messages thrown from the court of Francis I, from the court of the Habsburgs to England, back and forth. And the artists are involved in this. They're all basically artists and spies and soldiers. They're many things. I think Susannah was sent also to be like, well, see what you can find out. because she was a
spy,
Renaissance. Yes, she was a
For Henry
Renaissance
VIII,
woman.
exactly. Yes, I think so as well.
Yeah.
Because with Henry VIII, it was never just straightforward. I'm sending you there so that you can keep company and talk to her and embroider and do
exactly.
little work.
And then she was
It's
smart.
never that easy.
She knew how the king was too, and she knew how valuable and how she had to walk on eggshells and be useful to him, because it's been said many times that she was poor during several periods of her life. Why is a leading Renaissance artist poor? Because she lost her patron, then her second patron lost her head because she worked for Anne Boleyn, and then Jane Seymour there are miniatures of Jane Seymour, and Jane Seymour is painted by Holbein in a picture that looks exactly like the miniature portrait by the Horenbouts of Catherine of Aragon.
Yes, it's fashioned to resemble that miniature.
And
yes, she's wearing red. She's wearing the IHS brooch. So yeah, that's she's even she even has.
I found that brooch. Do you know where it is mentioned? Several of them
in the inventories of. I saw this several times in inventories of Henry VIII's later wives. So, for example, Anne Boleyn has it, Jane Seymour has it, and it crops up later in Catherine Parr's inventories again. So it's.
Do you know where else it is? It is in the will of Margaret Beaufort, and she gives it to Henry.
That's the origin of the IHS brooch.
Yes, so she gives it to Henry. But also, there's a portrait of Mary of Hungary wearing one of these. So
we're back to this again.
So, and we know, for example, that Mary of Hungary receives Holbein to paint Christina of Denmark, her niece. This is because Mary of Hungary, we have to think in terms of Mary of Hungary like we think now of Margaret of Austria. I know everybody's talking about Margaret of Austria now. They'll be talking
rightly so, because she was great.
Yes, they'll be talking about Mary of Hungary very soon, I can assure you.
Mary of Hungary, yes, she was also a very prominent patron of the artists, and she inherited Margaret of Austria's collection after all.
Exactly, yes. And her artists and her
artists and everything that goes with it. Yeah.
Exactly. And she was raised by Maximilian too. She was raised by her grandfather, who was the father of Margaret. They had the same mentor, one of the most powerful men in the Renaissance, who was painted by Dürer, these women have just been brought up to use art in their own advantage. And Mary of Hungary says time and again, we have to help Mary Tudor's cause in England. It's not Mary Tudor's cause, it's the Catholics' cause too, because Mary is a symbol for the Catholic faith in England. And that they seem that is lost until Mary becomes the rightful heir and becomes queen, and that happens. And what happens as soon as Mary becomes queen? Oh, Philip is available. Here, marry your cousin. He's he's 27. We'll send you a portrait by Titian. That's when Titian received. Well, it's all connected, really, and that's why it's so interesting. Yes. Yeah,
it really gives us.
It'll be very interesting to see how much the Tudor books are going to change in the next 5 years. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm excited for this too. I just feel like we're getting a more well-rounded view of Tudor history when we're able to think about the entertainment and artistic side of it is included and studied a little bit further.
We need a biographer for Fun Guy. Where are we going to find some?
It's very interesting that we are learning so much about the artistic patronage at the Tudor court, because until very recently it wasn't such a blooming subject. And just on the subject of this, I wanted to say, and you both know about it, but maybe the listeners doesn't know, that later this year I'm planning to release my next book, which is entitled Secrets of the Tudor Portraits, and it's all about Tudor portraits.
Nice. Well, that's one I will put on my list. When is it coming out?
In March.
Oh, right in time. So this will be amazing, because the exhibition I'm running is on portrait medals. So a subject that is, and the good thing about portrait medals, they have inscriptions. We have lots of things that can help us. So I'm very excited for your book, and to see, because can you tell us something about the book? Like maybe the people What kinds of portraits? Are they just people from the Tudor court? Have you?
They are the people from the Tudor court. So basically, I wanted to concentrate on how people of the Tudor court, and this includes the queens, the noblemen, how they conveyed various messages through portraiture. So that's
Very
I'm very
Renaissance.
excited for it.
It's giving
because-
Renaissance.
Yes, exactly. And it's very exciting because I had so much fun writing and researching this book. Because
Nice.
I love portraiture. It's such a great way to get into the period, to imagine those people, to kind of see them with your imagination, to have these pictures of them in your head. And the way how they did those messages, how they portrayed themselves, how they wanted to be seen, it's very fascinating. So I'm very excited for that, for people to read it. And I think it's going to be a different look at the Tudor court, different than people are used to seeing. Because I haven't seen a book that delves into this kind of artistic stuff and all the good things about secret messages and the images and stuff like that. So one of the things that I can tell you about it, it's that the portrait that we've been talking about of Jane Seymour, where she has this red gown and IHS brush.
Beautiful portrait.
Beautiful, yeah. She also has this girdle belt around her waist.
Oh, yeah.
Those little beads that are hanging from it look like vases, or and I've proposed a theory that those little vases are ointment jars relating to Mary Magdalene, to Saint Mary Magdalene. And this was further explored by Dr. Charlotte Boland in her book about the exhibition that she created in the National Portrait Gallery about the Six Wives. And it's very interesting that it's such a small idea. I was thinking maybe not, that is maybe not that important, but this small idea led to more exploration of Jane Seymour and Saint Mary Magdalene. And I'm a self-confessed aficionado of Saint Mary Magdalene. I love Mary Magdalene. I see her everywhere. So that's why I've noticed that this the beads resemble the ointment jars that are associated in iconography with Mary Magdalene. And of course, Mary Magdalene is a very important figure for medieval and Renaissance women. They are often portrayed as Mary Magdalene. We have Margaret of Austria, for example, posing as Mary Magdalene. So it's interesting that Jane Seymour linked herself to this particular saint. But I think it's not really a coincidence, because as we all know, and Emma knows that very well, Catherine of Aragon was painted as Saint Mary Magdalene as well by Citeaux. So that's, I think,
her favorite portraitist.
Exactly, yeah. So I think that Jane Seymour trying to, show a little bit interest in Mary Magdalene is perhaps because she knew that Catherine of Aragon was painted as Mary Magdalene and had interest in that saint. So that's another link between the two queens, because we know that Jane Seymour was modeling her queenship, and she was very much an admirer of Catherine of Aragon, and that's why her portrait resembles that miniature, as we said before.
I agree. I in 2015, I published a paper on the influence of jewelry on goldsmithing, Spanish, so because of the dowry, right? The big dowry that Catherine takes to England and all that. And I talked about this portrait, and if you go to the inventories of Henry VIII, there's a few of these golden jar ointments. One of them has pomegranates, and so I was trying to make a connection between both, because I agree. I think Mary Magdalene is very, very important. I want to bring up a very important work too, Holbein's first work in England, Noli Me Tangere, which is so this is also Mary Magdalene. Very interesting theories that, could he have depicted them as looking as some people? This is his only work that is really in this first stay in England that is really, we know that he painted, and it was part then of the collection of Henry VIII when he died. Was it Henry VIII all along? I don't think so. I think we know Henry appropriated all of Catherine of Aragon's things, but also Anne Boleyn's things. And anytime, he became a widow, he would, have new things or repurpose things. So it's very interesting I think this is a very interesting lead, Sylvia, because the women identify, and we have to look also into the text, because they, when they mention themselves, they make comparisons. So, for example, Juan Luis Vives compares Catherine to Lucretia, but other times to saints, like, or Mary, the first identifies with the Virgin Mary because it's her namesake. In the case of Mary Magdalene, she's a very interesting figure, isn't she? I love her too.
She is.
So
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward for your book and finding out all about this. I love that portrait of Jane Seymour. It's such a beautiful.
It's very beautiful.
And it's why we love Holbein, right?
It is. It's interesting that we know so little about Jane Seymour, but we know so much about her through portraiture, and she was painted by Holbein, so it doesn't get any better than this.
And I think it's very interesting that you're doing that comparative and projection further back to Catherine, because we are finding out, and we know so many things about Catherine, and then they complement each other. And from one lead, you can pick to the other, right? I think there needs to be a lot more work on Mary Tudor, and Jane Seymour, and Mary Tudor and all the wives, really. Because what I propose in my chapter is that Mary was involved in the recruitment of Lavina Turnley, but not just Mary. I think Catherine Parr. It's not because one did it, the other one wasn't there. They had partnerships, and Catherine Parr and Mary Tudor had a partnership. Whatever happened later or things like that. But for a long time, I mean, wasn't Catherine Parr first introduced to Henry VIII probably because of Mary? So all these things. And especially that period that Mary comes back to court before her father dies. And he builds a whole palace for her in Whitehall. This is the same year that she pays for that portrait. She's also someone really relevant. That's when Lavina Turnley starts to be in the court called paintrix. I think if we had the privy purse expenses of Catherine of Aragon, it would be very similar to the privy purse.
That would be very interesting.
Yes, and then I think there would be mentions to the paintrix, but we just don't have it. We do know that things like Catherine Parr inherited miniatures of Henry VIII because of her mom. So,
her mother, yes.
The reconstruction is now there. It's just a matter. We're going to find so much more now that we have. There's gaps on a pretty solid, theory now. So, we need more though. We need a lot of people working on this because it's very difficult.
Well, we always talk about needing collaborations, right? That's the important thing when it comes to research. And Sylvia, I can't thank you enough for the research that you've done on this sketch. And, for those who are listening today or watching us, if they would like to read the article, how can they go about doing so?
So for you can just type it into the Royal Studies Journal, and then when you come to their official website, they have this new issue posted on their main page. You can also go to my social media platforms, for example, Twitter or X, it's called now. I have it pinned to my profile, so the link is right there. The other day I just checked, just to see how it's going, and it was seen for about 600 times and downloaded 95 times, and I was like, what? Because the great thing about the Royal Studies Journal is that it's open access.
Yes.
That anyone can read it, that it's not behind a paywall, and it was really important to me to submit there because it's open access, and I didn't really want it to disappear behind paid subscriptions. So it's great that everybody can read it. I can post it again when this episode of the podcast will be released. And so I wanted to thank you, Rebecca, for inviting me and for giving me a platform to be talking about this discovery. And also thank you, Dr. Emma, for tuning in and doing this amazing interview and sharing her expertise on the portraits of Henry VIII's queens and other Renaissance women. It's always great to talk to you girls about my favorite subject, the Tudors.
Yes, and thank you so much to both of you. Sylvia, of course, I'd love to have you on the show. We'll have you back again when your new book comes out. Probably,
yeah.
hopefully, I can get you on before is released in March so we can help get some sales going for you. And Dr. Emma, thank you as always for coming on today and sharing your knowledge with us. We'd love to have you on the show.
Hey, anytime to talk about this, anytime.
And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you love the show and would like to show your support, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty. Over there, you'll get commercial-free episodes, early access, and some patron exclusive content as well. If you would prefer to show your support in another way, head on over to my website, tudorsdynasty.com, and click on the shop to see some of the new merchandise that I have available. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.